Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Once upon a time, there lived a princess named Snow White. Her hair was as black as coal, lips red as a rose, and her skin as white as snow. Snow White's stepmother, the queen, was very mean. She hated anyone who was more beautiful than her. The queen had a magic mirror and asked it, "Mirror, mirror, on the wall, who is the fairest one of all?" Every day the mirror had the same reply, "You are the fairest." One day the magic mirror told the queen that Snow White was the fairest in the land. This made the queen very jealous. The queen told her royal huntsman to take Snow White far into the forest and kill her. The queen told the huntsman to bring back Snow White's heart as proof she was dead. The huntsman found Snow White but could not kill her. He warned Snow White that the queen wanted her dead. Snow White ran to the forest. The huntsman lied to the queen and took her a heart from a pig. Snow White came to a cottage and wondered who lived there. 7 dwarfs lived in the cottage. They returned to the cottage and introduced themselves to Snow White. Dozy, grouchy, merry, professor, silly, sniffy and blushful. Snow White felt safe with the dwarfs, so she decided to stay with them. The queen had discovered the huntsman lied and that Snow White was still alive. She mixed a potion that changed her into an old hag, and she poisoned an apple to give to Snow White. Snow White took a bite from the poisoned apple and fell asleep. The sad dwarfs built a bed for Snow White. One day a handsome prince rode into the forest. He saw Snow White and knelt down and kissed her. His kiss awakened Snow White. The prince and Snow White rode off to the prince's kingdom, where they lived happily ever after.
The 12 Dancing Princesses. Once upon a time, there was a poor boy called Joseph, who led a humble life in a small village, working for his master, who was very pleased with his work. All the other peasant boys envied him, because he was clever, handsome and hardworking. The village girls were desperately trying to make him notice them, but he paid them no attention. They used to call him Prince Charming. One sunny day, tired as he was after working very hard, he slipped into the forest and lay down under a huge oak tree and slept under its hospitable shelter. And while he slept, a beautiful fairy dressed in a robe sparkling with diamonds appeared before him and told him, "Go to the king's castle, because you'll find your fortune there." No sooner had he reached home, than he went straight to his master and said to him, "Master, I have a good mind to go into the wide world to seek my fortune. I have served you enough and now it's time for me to turn over a new leaf." His master tried to change his mind and make him stay to no avail, so he paid the boy for his work and he was gone. Joseph soon reached the king's court and went to the gardener to ask for work. Seeing him so tidy and clever, the gardener liked him and accepted his services. His main job was to make 12 little bouquets every day and give them to the king's 12 daughters each morning when they went out for a walk. The 12 princesses were doomed not to be able to marry until someone could make one of them fall in love with him and thus deliver them from their fate, which gifted them with the passion for dance. The princesses were crazy about dance and every night they tore up their shoes. But no one knew where they went, because they were locked in. Then the king made it known to all the land, that if any person could find out where it was that the princesses danced in the night, he should have the one he liked best for his wife, and should be king after his death. Many suitors came to the castle, but the princes who had been watching during the night could no longer be found in the morning. They just disappeared, and no one knew what had happened to them. 11 princes were lost so far and no one dared to try his luck any more. Joseph did his job very well, and the princesses were pleased with his work. He was so humble that he didn't even dare to look at them when he gave them the bouquets. It was only when he gave the flowers to the youngest of them, Laura, that his cheeks flushed and his heart started to beat wildly. The princess felt the same way about him, though her sisters were not delighted at all to see that. He was thinking to go and watch, too, but he didn't dare. One night, the fairy appeared in his dreams again and said to him, "Go to the eastern angle of the garden and there you'll find 2 small laurel trees. Take good care of them. When they have grown, ask anything you want, and they will give it to you." Saying this, she disappeared from sight. As soon as he woke up, he went straight to the place described by the fairy. When he reached there, he just couldn't believe his eyes. The laurel trees were right there. He took very good care of them, and when they grew up enough, he asked them to make him invisible. His wish was granted immediately. In the evening, when the princesses entered their room, Joseph sneaked inside. The doors were then shut and locked up by 9 bolts. He noticed that, instead of preparing to go to bed, the princesses began to brush their hair, to dress themselves in beautiful clothes, and to put on jewels like they were going to leave somewhere here. Then, the eldest sister stamped her foot on the floor 3 times, and suddenly, a trapdoor opened. They went down on a secret staircase till they reached a garden whose gates opened when the eldest sister stamped her foot again. Joseph followed them everywhere they went. They passed through a forest with silver leaves, then through another one where all the leaves were of gold. Then into a third with the leaves glittering with diamonds, and after that they came to a great lake. In the middle of the lake, there was a marvelous castle, beautiful beyond description, dazzling in its brilliance. 12 boats with 12 paddlers were waiting for them ashore. The princesses seated themselves into the boats. Joseph entered the boat where the youngest princess was seated. When they reached the other side of the lake, a merry music of horns and trumpets could be heard. The princesses ran into the castle as soon as they landed. Joseph was surprised to see that the princes who had watched them and had disappeared were all present there. They began dancing together. So, that's why they were never seen again, Joseph thought. He seated himself into a corner, looking at everything that was going on there in open-mouthed wonder. He soon found himself dancing, too, among the others. The princesses danced on, till their shoes were worn out and they had to return home. On their way back, Joseph broke a twig from each forest they went through. Each time he did that, the forest made a loud noise, which startled a little the princesses, but since they couldn't explain what happened, they decided to go on. The next day, when Joseph gave the princesses the little bouquets, he slipped the 3 twigs into Laura's bouquet. She was so amazed to see those twigs in her bouquet and had no idea how they could have reached there. Now that he knew everything, Joseph went to his laurels and asked them to dress him like a prince. In the twinkling of an eye, his appearance was that of a prince. His judgment was different, too, his wits grew sharper, and he was dressed in fine clothes. "That's unbelievable," he exclaimed. "No one would recognize me." Then he went to the king and asked him to allow him to watch his daughters one night. The king felt sorry for him and advised him to give up rather than lose his life. He insisted, and the king finally agreed. He didn't suspect that the prince might be the gardener boy. When he took him to the princesses, they didn't recognize him either. Laura alone was startled by his sight, and her heart went pit-a-pat. The following night, the princesses took him with them. They reached the bewitched castle, and when dancing stopped, they went to the supper room. He was given the wine that all the other princes drank, too, that was meant to kindle the passion for dance in his heart, as well, making him lose his mind and soul. That moment he confessed his love to the youngest princess. She responded in the same way and asked him to throw away the wine. He obeyed. Everyone present stood thunderstruck, staring at them, upon hearing their words of love. Love triumphed and broke the spell that had been cast upon the princesses for so many years. They all found themselves in the king's palace again. The bewitched castle sank out of sight like it had never been. The king was so happy to see the charm was broken, that he made a great wedding, all of his daughters marrying the princes who had watched them. Joseph married Laura, and they all lived happily ever after.
Hansel and Gretel. Next to a great forest there lived a poor woodcutter with his wife and his 2 children. The boy's name was Hansel, and the girl's name was Gretel. He had but little to eat, and once, when a great famine came to the land, he could no longer provide even their daily bread. One evening, he sighed and said to his wife, "What is to become of us? How can we feed our children when we have nothing for ourselves?" "Man, do you know it?" answered the woman. "Early tomorrow morning you will take the 2 children out into the thickest part of the woods, make a fire for them, and give each of them a little piece of bread. Then leave them by themselves and go off to your work. They will not find their way back home, and we will be rid of them." "No, woman," said the man, "I will not do that. How could I bring myself to abandon my own children alone in the woods?" "Oh, you fool," she said, "then all 4 of us will starve. All you can do is to plane the boards for our coffins." And she gave him no peace until he agreed. The 2 children had not been able to fall asleep because of their hunger, and they heard what the stepmother had said to the father. At daybreak, even before sunrise, the woman came and woke the two children. "Get up, you lazybones. You are going into the woods to fetch wood." Then she gave each one a little piece of bread, saying, "Here is something for midday. Don't eat it any sooner, for you'll not get any more." On the way to the woods, Hansel crumbled his piece in his pocket, then often stood still and threw crumbs onto the ground. When they were deep into the woods, a large fire was made, and the father said, "Sit here, children. If you get tired, you can sleep a little. I am going into the woods to cut wood. I will come and get you in the evening when I am finished." When it was midday, Gretel shared her bread with Hansel, who had scattered his piece along the path. Then they fell asleep, and evening passed, but no one came to get the poor children. When the moon appeared, they got up, but they could not find any crumbs, for the many thousands of birds that fly about in the woods and in the fields had pecked them up. They walked through the entire night and the next day from morning until evening, but they did not find their way out of the woods. They went on until they came to a little house. When they came closer, they saw that the little house was built entirely from bread with a roof made of cake, and the windows were made of clear sugar. "Let's help ourselves to a good meal," said Hansel, very happy. Suddenly the door opened, and a woman, as old as the hills and leaning on a crutch, came creeping out. Hansel and Gretel were so frightened that they dropped what they were holding in their hands. But the old woman shook her head and said, "Oh, you dear children, who brought you here? Just come in and stay with me. No harm will come to you." She took them by the hand and led them into her house. Then she served them a good meal, milk and pancakes with sugar, apples, and nuts. Afterward she made 2 nice beds for them, decked in white. Hansel and Gretel went to bed, thinking they were in heaven. But the old woman had only pretended to be friendly. She was a wicked witch who was lying in wait there for children. She had built her house of bread only in order to lure them to her, and if she captured one, she would kill him, cook him, and eat him. And for her that was a day to celebrate. Early the next morning, before they awoke, she got up, went to their beds, and looked at the two of them lying there so peacefully, with their full red cheeks. Then she grabbed Hansel with her withered hand and carried him to a little stall, where she locked him behind a cage door. Cry as he might, there was no help for him. Then she shook Gretel and cried, "Get up, lazybones. Fetch water and cook something good for your brother. He is locked outside in the stall and is to be fattened up. When he is fat, I am going to eat him." Gretel began to cry, but it was all for nothing. She had to do what the witch demanded. Now Hansel was given the best things to eat every day, but Gretel received nothing but crayfish shells. After 4 weeks, she shouted to the girl, "Hey, Gretel. Hurry up and fetch some water. Whether Hansel is fat or thin, tomorrow I am going to slaughter him and boil him." The next morning Gretel had to get up early, hang up the kettle with water, and make a fire. Then the old woman called, "Gretel, come here right now to the oven." And when Gretel came, she said, "Look inside and see if the bread is nicely brown and done, for my eyes are weak, and I can't see that far. If you can't see that far either, then sit on the board, and I'll push you inside, then you can walk around inside and take a look." But Gretel said, "I don't know how to do that. How can I get inside? The opening is big enough. See, I myself could get in." And she crawled up, stuck her head into the oven. Then Gretel gave her a shove, causing her to fall in. Then she closed the iron door and secured it with a bar. The old woman began to howl frightfully. But Gretel ran away, and the godless witch burned up miserably. Gretel ran straight to Hansel, unlocked his stall, and cried, "Hansel, we are saved. The old witch is dead." Then Hansel jumped out, like a bird from its cage when someone opens its door. How happy they were! They threw their arms around each other's necks, jumped with joy, and kissed one another. Because they now had nothing to fear, they went into the witch's house. In every corner were chests of pearls and precious stones. They filled their pockets, then ran away and found their way back home. When they saw the father's house in the distance, they began to run, rushed inside, and threw their arms around the father's neck. The man had not had even one happy hour since he had left the children in the woods. However, the woman had died. Gretel shook out her basket, scattering pearls and precious stones around the room, and Hansel added to them by throwing one handful after the other from his pockets. Look, father, we're rich now. You'll never have to chop wood again. And they all lived happily together ever after.
The Selfish Giant. Every afternoon, as they were coming from school, the children used to go and play in the giant's garden. It was a large, lovely garden, with soft green grass. Here and there over the grass stood beautiful flowers like stars, and there were 12 peach trees that in the springtime broke out into delicate blossoms of pink and pearl, and in the autumn bore rich fruit. The birds sat on the trees and sang so sweetly that the children used to stop their games in order to listen to them. "How happy we are here," they cried to each other. One day the giant came back. He had been to visit his friend the Cornish ogre, and had stayed with him for 7 years. After the 7 years were over, he had said all that he had to say, for his conversation was limited, and he determined to return to his own castle. When he arrived, he saw the children playing in the garden. "What are you doing here?" he cried in a very gruff voice, and the children ran away. "My own garden is my own garden," said the giant. "Anyone can understand that, and I will allow nobody to play in it but myself." So he built a high wall around it, and put up a notice board. "Trespassers will be prosecuted." He was a very selfish giant. The poor children had now nowhere to play. They tried to play on the road, but the road was very dusty and full of hard stones, and they did not like it. They used to wander round the high wall when their lessons were over, and talk about the beautiful garden inside. "How happy we were there," they said to each other. Then the spring came, and all over the country there were little blossoms and little birds. Only in the garden of the selfish giant it was still winter. The birds did not care to sing in it as there were no children, and the trees forgot to blossom. Once a beautiful flower put its head out from the grass, but when it saw the notice board it was so sorry for the children that it slipped back into the ground again, and went off to sleep. "I cannot understand why the spring is so late in coming," said the selfish giant, as he sat at the window and looked out at his cold white garden. "I hope there will be a change in the weather." But the spring never came, nor the summer. The autumn gave golden fruit to every garden, but to the giant's garden she gave none. "He is too selfish," she said. So it was always winter there, and the north wind, and the hail, and the frost, and the snow danced about through the trees. One morning the giant was lying awake in bed when he heard some lovely music. It sounded so sweet to his ears that he thought it must be the king's musicians passing by. It was really only a little linnet singing outside his window, but it was so long since he had heard a bird sing in his garden that it seemed to him to be the most beautiful music in the world. Then the hail stopped dancing over his head, and the north wind ceased roaring, and a delicious perfume came to him through the open casement. "I believe the spring has come at last," said the giant, and he jumped out of bed and looked out. What did he see? He saw a most wonderful sight. Through a little hole in the wall the children had crept in, and they were sitting in the branches of the trees. In every tree that he could see there was a little child, and the trees were so glad to have the children back again that they had covered themselves with blossoms, and were waving their arms gently above the children's heads. The birds were flying about and twittering with delight, and the flowers were looking up through the green grass and laughing. It was a lovely scene, only in one corner it was still winter. It was the farthest corner of the garden, and in it was standing a little boy. He was so small that he could not reach up to the branches of the tree, and he was wandering all round it, crying bitterly. The poor tree was still quite covered with frost and snow, and the north wind was blowing and roaring above it. "Climb up, little boy," said the tree, and it bent its branches down as low as that could. But the boy was too tiny, and the giant's heart melted as he looked out. "How selfish I have been," he said. "Now I know why the spring will not come here. I will put that poor little boy on the top of the tree, and then I will knock down the wall, and my garden shall be the children's playground forever and ever." He was really very sorry for what he had done. So he crept downstairs and opened the front door quite softly, and went out into the garden. But when the children saw him they were so frightened that they all ran away, and the garden became winter again. Only the little boy did not run, for his eyes were so full of tears that he did not see the giant coming. And the giant stole up behind him and took him gently in his hand, and put him up into the tree. And the tree broke at once into blossom, and the birds came and sang on it, and the little boy stretched out his 2 arms and flung them round the giant's neck, and kissed him. And the other children, when they saw that the giant was not wicked any longer, came running back, and with them came the spring. "It is your garden now, little children," said the giant, and he took a great axe and knocked down the wall. And when the people were going to market at 12 o'clock they found the giant playing with the children in the most beautiful garden they had ever seen. Moral of the story. The moral of the story is life is better with generosity and kindness and not selfishness. In the given story, the giant became truly happy only after he became kind to the children and allowed them to play in his garden. Similarly, selfishness takes us nowhere in life, always making us feel grumpy and sad, but being kind towards others gives us a feeling of satisfaction.
Rumpelstiltskin. Once there was a very poor miller who could not even pay his taxes to the kingdom. Because of this, the king ordered that he should be sent to prison. The miller was afraid, so he tried to trick the king. "Forgive me," he beseeched, "and I will give you my daughter who can spin straw into gold." "Then bring her to me and I will forgive you," the king said. The miller was very sorry for what he said, but it was too late. That night, the king took the miller's daughter into a room filled with straw. "You must spin the straw into gold by morning," he said, "or you and your father will be sent to prison." Then he locked the door. But the poor girl had no idea how she was supposed to do that. She strove hard, but nothing happened. Then she began to weep bitterly. Suddenly, the door opened and a strange little man entered. "Good evening, Mistress Miller. Why are you so sad?" "The king ordered me to spin the straw into gold," she sobbed. "I can help you, but you must give me something in return." "Here's my necklace," she said. In response, the dwarf grabbed it in an instant. The little man sat down at the spinning wheel and, as soon as he started to spin it, the reel was filled with gold. And he did so the whole night till he finished spinning all the straw. By morning, the room was full of glittering gold. The king was so amazed to see all that gold that sparkled and shined incredibly. But the king became greedier and took the girl into a bigger room, with more straw than before, and ordered her to spin all of it into gold. The little man came to her rescue again. This time, the girl offered him her golden ring, which was a gift from her mother. The king's greed grew again, though he tried to fight it, feeling compassion for the girl. But he locked her, anyway, for the 3rd time into a tower filled with straw and made a promise to her. "If you can spin all this straw into gold by morning, I promise to marry you," he said. Once again, the little man came in, but this time, the girl had nothing left to offer him. "Then you must give me your firstborn child after you get married," he said. The girl agreed, desperate as she was, though she promised herself never to do that. The next day, the king was very happy to see so much gold again. At the same time, he was touched by the girl's patience and endurance. He felt his greed melting away and love blooming instead. The king asked the girl for forgiveness. Then, he kept his promise and married the miller's daughter and made her his queen. A year later, the queen gave birth to a child. She had completely forgotten about the little man. But one day, he came into her room again. "I have come to take what you promised me, remember," he said. The queen offered him all the riches in the world, hoping she could keep her baby, but he just wouldn't hear. "Something alive is more precious to me than all the riches of this world," he said. Then, the little man proposed her a strange game. "I give you 3 days to guess my name. If you guess, you can keep your baby." The queen spent the whole night making a long list with all the names she had ever heard. The next day, she read all the names to the little man, but she didn't guess. Then, the queen sent messengers to search for names throughout the kingdom. Even so, she could not guess the little man's name. The third day, the queen lost all hope. She sent her messengers again to search for names. When she least expected, the last messenger returned with a strange story. I was just passing through the forest when I saw a funny little man dancing around a big fire, he told the queen. He was singing, "The queen is never going to win, for my name is Rumpelstiltskin." That night, at first, the queen played a little with the dwarf. "Is your name Skatin?" "No, this is not my name," he answered. "Then, is it a Raritlon?" "No, it's not this either." "Could it be Rumpelstiltskin?" she finally asked, smiling. On hearing this, the little man became so angry that he turned blue. And he stamped his feet so hard that he made a hole into the floor. Rumpelstiltskin ran off ashamed, and he was never seen again. The king discovered a new treasure, more precious than gold, love. He learned that family makes you the richest man on earth. So the king and the queen lived happily ever after together with their beautiful daughter.